My name is Josh Peacock. I like jiu-jitsu, but I'm not a jiu-jitsu black belt. I'm not even a jiu-jitsu purple belt. I'm an exceptionally crappy jiu-jitsu blue belt. I do it mostly for exercise. But I am interested. I do like it a lot. I'm actually a Taekwondo black belt, so I snuck in here to teach you guys about ecological dynamics. That's my claim to fame, is understanding this theory of motor behavior and of learning and motor skill development. So I run a podcast called the Combat Learning Podcast. I've run it for, I think, within the month, Scott Seavright and I started our podcast at almost the same time. We were on some weird wavelength that was emanating throughout the universe at that time during COVID. So we both started within April, I think, and it's been 4 years now. So
I started in March.
Oh, you started in March?
How long until you guys got
Did I say March? I got you, yeah.
How long after you started until you guys found each other?
Oh, dude, probably 6 months to a year, I think, yeah. It was a little while. I forgot how, it was a storm.
Who made the first move?
This dude. He was courting me, dude. I don't even, yeah, for sure. So, when I first started, I did a lot, really just interviewing a lot of different people, but subject matter experts. As I've come to understand the system, I've tried to do my best to distill things in ways that are more easily understandable to martial artists, more so into martial artist terms, because as martial artists, not just in jiu-jitsu, but across really any martial arts, we have a sort of specialized language that we become socialized into, and we default to that language because once we get into that subculture, it becomes a part of our identity. And so it's much, once we become familiar with that sort of nomenclature, it is easy to default to that nomenclature. And so a lot of I hear a lot about the way Greg talks, the way he describes things. I've got a bit of it myself. I do have a pretentious vocabulary, so I mean, a lot of it's my fault. My mom told me that the best thing I can do for persuasion and commanding people's attention was to pay attention to my SAT words when I was in high school, and that was not true. I mean, a certain number of people are dazzled by big words, but a lot of people are put off by it. So one of the models that I put together to help people, because I hear this all the time, our mutual friend, Preet Mikkelsen, I haven't talked to him yet, but I listened to his stuff. Just about everyone who coaches that gets into ecological dynamics and the constraints-led approach, they go through a bit of a crisis of identity. What do I do as a coach? Am I even a coach anymore? Yes, you are a coach, but things work a lot differently. And so I put together what I call the 3D model of coaching to distill what it is you as a coach do within the constraints-led approach. How do you position yourself? How do you understand yourself? How do you function inside of the constraints-led approach? But before we dive into the 3D model, I want to set the tone here really quick. So I want to, the emphasis, I'm covering a lot of ground here. The emphasis of this presentation is understanding in more detailed terms how to direct attention as a coach, and how directing attention actually permeates every coaching action that you engage in as an ecological coach or a constraints-led coach. I prefer constraints-led, but the beast has gotten away from me. Everyone says ecological now. It's all eco, and nobody says constraints-led approach anymore, so that makes me sad. So I wanted to answer some questions here that come up very commonly. Is CLA truly hands-off coaching? I don't know if anyone asks this anymore, but a few years ago, before the second edition of this Dynamics of Skill Acquisition came out, and this is actually a genuine fault of the researchers in the way that they communicated this. They talked about CLA as a sort of hands-off coaching, because as a facilitator, Ed talked about this quite a bit, you're not quite as hands-on as you are when you're constantly intervening. but it's not actually a hands-off approach. You're not intervening as much as you normally would in the traditional approach. The other question I want to answer is, can or do you use instruction CLA? The answer to that question is yes, and we're going to get into how that functions. As you can probably figure out, the instructions mostly come in the form of task instruction, not so much stopping the flow of practice and then going through direct didactic instruction with a learner. And then finally, how does the coach function before, during, and after training? This was supposed to be a joke. I did a "Isn't it just positional sparring with constraints?" Because when I put this together, I thought it was going to be on a projector, and I was supposed to be like a punchline. Sorry, dude, guys, it's not as funny when you can see it already. Okay, so before we get into this, I wanted to talk really briefly about ecological dynamics as a theory, what its claims are at a really broad level. So this first part here is ecological dynamics and skilled behavior. This is really important to understand because attention is one of the three fundamental parts of how skilled movement emerges according to the ecological account of skilled movement. So everything begins with, and you've heard Greg talk about this a lot, education of intention. He says focus of intention, education, focus of intention are the same thing. Education intention, understanding what I must do. Once you understand what you must do, you have to find the right information to pair your action to, which is education of attention. We have limited attentional resources, so helping learners sort through the signal, the noise rather, to find the signal is an extremely important part of what you do as a coach, which is why Ed and many others who talk about the constraints-led approach will position the coach as a guide, not just as a facilitator, but also as a guide. Not a guide who tells you exactly where to put your hand when you're scaling the mountain or something like that, but who helps to direct your attention. Finally, the last part of, we're not going to talk much about this in the presentation, but the last part of that account of skilled movement is calibration. That's where you experiment and you fine-tune the way that you exert your own energy as you find information and pair it with action. Ed mentioned specifying information. That's the same thing. If you find the right information that you can pair your action to, that is how you become skilled. An example of that, grappling's so dynamic that it's hard to key in on one specific thing. But if you've ever blown through an area where there's a stop paint on the concrete, but not a sign, often that's because you expect there to be a big red sign for the stop. And I think some of Rob's research showed that you coordinate pressing the brake the brake pad, with the way that you monitor the stop sign. And so as the stop sign, the visual structure of the stop sign changes on your retina and becomes larger, you eventually calibrate to when you need to put your foot on that brake pad to coordinate. Some of us are better than that than others. Some of us, me, wait till the last second sometimes to put the foot on the brake. But when you're brand new, or when the information that you expect to find is not there, that you don't have that specifying information for braking, and so you might just blow right through a place where it just says stop on the sidewalk if you're not looking for it, because you expect to find a different piece of information to specify to. Okay, so ecological dynamics and attention. So attention is super important, like I mentioned before. I think the APA, I didn't write this down, so I'm going to be recalling it from memory. The APA defines learning as an improvement based on a relatively permanent, be a really important word there, improvement in skill based on practice or training. And that's a fine definition. If IP people default IP, like these sort of what Stuart Armstrong calls a folk pedagogy, if they understood learning in those terms, almost everything they do would probably be better. But ecological dynamics comes in and says, actually, there's not just a outward performance like the way I coordinate myself. There's not just a coordinative improvement. There's actually underlying that an improvement in perception. So we talk about perception action all the time. You've probably heard this many, many times. Perception is so important because of the theory of direct perception, finding the information and then coordinating based on the information that you see. And so with ecological dynamics, learning is the same as with the APA definition, with an important addition, and that is that learning is search. Learning is finding and exploiting key information, specifying information. So a part of that is the information movement coupling. This is like a key part of direct perception and what that means for motor control, how you coordinate your action in the moment. We don't often think a lot about how it is we actually control our movements, because you have such a mind-boggling array of degrees of freedom in how you can coordinate yourselves, and so many different theoretical or rather hypothetical possibilities of how you could address a given movement problem that's presented to you. And yet, it is almost never the case that when presented with a movement problem, that you just do nothing, that you do nothing. You always do something, even if it's not good. Even if it doesn't work, if it's not functional, you still coordinate it. How is it that you coordinate? That's where the theory of constraints come in. We can't really go too far into that, but there's a lot of things that are constraining your movement that you're not aware of that's happening, that accounts for why you actually decide, so to speak. It's not a discrete decision, but it is a decision nonetheless. To coordinate your body in a certain way. So with information movement coupling, goal-directed movement is controlled by pairing environmental information with the intention that you want to get to. So those are two constraints that are operating upon you to limit the plausible movement solutions that you will try in that moment. So perception and action are fundamentally and functionally intertwined, because people talk a lot. In martial arts speak, we talk reaction. Everything's reactions, but not everything is actually reactions. We don't want to be counter fighters necessarily. There's action. Action creates information. One of my favorite examples of this is Marcelo Garcia has this like prodding style of guard passing, and he's not always chaining movements directly together. He's just going to hit your shoulder to see what you do, right? And so he's creating perturbations in the system, so to speak, to use ecological dynamics terminology. He's creating perturbations in the system to see how the system reacts, and to create information that he can then exploit going forward. There's an interesting experiment that was done by Lee and Lishman in 1975, where they put individuals in a room, and the individuals were not aware that the walls were actually gradually moving in and out. They weren't aware of this, but when the researchers analyzed the way they were moving, they were swaying back and forth based on whether or not the wall was coming in or out. So there was an almost, I would say, automatic. There's some debate about automatic, but we don't have enough time for that. So it's like an automatic response. They weren't even aware the walls were moving, and yet their bodies were adjusting to the visual perception that didn't even register consciously. That is how tightly perception action is coupled. It is coupled so tight that you aren't even consciously aware of how your body is, at the risk of muddying the waters, processing that information. Our view of processing is different. We try not to use that word, but Your body is using that information, it's exploiting that information. So you can, in fact, improve perception. We call this perceptual attunement. Perceptual attunement is what you'll hear a lot when you listen to people like Keith Davids. This is the learning part of perception. This is how your perception gets better, which is usually upstream from an improvement in actual performance. What you see people doing, the coordinated skill effort. So according to ecological dynamics, learning is an improvement in your ability to perceive, which is to detect and exploit information for action in the environment. Do you guys know what I mean when I say exploit information in the environment? Yeah, it's like act upon, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. It's kind of a charged word, but yes, so you're taking advantage of it in a way. The process of dialing in the right information sources is known as perceptual attunement. I already mentioned that, but this is why live training problems is so important, and why the natural learning process of making mistakes is so key, because every person is different, and the way you solve the problem is going to be unique to you. And so you have to work through those problems. And as a coach, as a guide, you're trying to help them find the right information without getting in the way. And we're going to talk here in a second about internal versus external focus of attention very quickly before we get into the bulk of things. But the way you talk can, in fact, get in the way, even in the process of delivering task instructions. But it should be pretty apparent now that because of attentional focus is a feature of the perceptual system, directing attention is just really a primary concern with guiding learners as a coach in the constraints-led approach. So internal versus external focus of attention, we touched on this briefly earlier today. If you are looking at your slides, it should be slide 11. There's examples here. I'll read off a couple of them of cues or instructions rather that will induce or are likely to induce internal focus versus external. So for a field kick, if you were to, as a football coach, if you were to say contact your foot between the toe and the ankle as you kick the football, you are describing 2 points, 2 landmarks on the body of the performer in that case. You're being very, very specific. Versus an external focus, an external focus version of that would be simply kick through the bottom of the ball. So there is a place on the ball that is optimal to kick, and we're actually embedding that detail into the instruction, but we're letting them self-organize the best way that they can make that ball lift off the ground and head towards the, I'm such a martial artist, dude. What is it called? The goal post. That's, wow. Dude. Yeah, I don't know anything outside of martial arts. Terrible. Yes, goal post. Yeah. So another example of that would be a bench press. This is very common. I hear a lot of excellent coaches, otherwise excellent coaches. If you were to describe or to instruct somebody on how to do the bench press, unlock the elbows. Let the barbell lower to go to your lower chest. Keep your shoulders pinched together. Press the bar back up with the elbows at roughly a 45-degree angle. There's so much going on. You even have to do geometry to follow those instructions. What does it even mean, a 45-degree angle relative to what? It just creates more question. I used to teach this way too, in terms of how to pivot your foot properly when performing a kick. There is, it's 90 to 180 degrees for a Taekwondo style round kick or anything like that. It's over the top, and then you're supposed to I think I said that to kids. I made this mistake one time. Teaching the kids, turn it at a 45-degree angle, and they're like, what? And they often won't ask questions, so they just won't do anything, or they'll just do something random. An external version of that would be lower the bar The bar is external to you. It's an object that you're manipulating. The bar is external to you. Lower the bar as far as it will go. So I'm trying to avoid a landmark. If you added a landmark, I don't think that would be incredibly bad, but I would see what happens with just saying lower the bar as far as it will go, then punch the barbell back into the ceiling. Now I added a little bit of like performance cueing in there with the punch to make it more visceral. There's other ways to do bench pressing for maybe bodybuilding where you wouldn't want that explosive movement, so you wouldn't use that cue, but that's an example of that. For a round kick, this is one of my favorite examples. The way I used to teach it would be, swing your leg, bring your knee up, turn it over your hips. You want to stack your hips on top of each other. I thought that was a brilliant instruction. Stack your hips on top of each other. Nobody, adult to child, nobody knew what that meant. And I didn't find out that nobody knew what that meant until I asked them. Nobody asked the question. Nobody's like, what does that mean, Coach? What does that even mean? So they just tried to follow all the other parts of it. So extend, make contact near the bottom of your shin, a part of the instep, and then retract. And so everything is embedded into the instruction. One of my buddies, I told him to try this with a college Olympic Taekwondo club that he runs. Smash the shin guard onto the middle of the bag or onto the hogu or the legal sparring area. And it's like magic. Instead of thinking in terms of here's how I need to coordinate the angles of my knee and the extension, the retraction, and like the intrinsic timing of my body, they're focused on finding the affordance or finding the opening and then meeting the task demand. Because if you don't hit with the right part of the foot, you don't score. So that is a hard constraint on how you score, and so that can be embedded in your instructions. For jiu-jitsu specifically, place like for a guillotine choke, place your shoulder and the tricep over your partner's head, circle your hand around and wrap the neck, cut an angle with your hips and go to this side and make sure the choking arm is elbow deep and it's tight against both sides of the neck. And if you do it with the Marcelo's way, you have an additional layer of moving and finding that arm, pulling it up, and so you have two things going on with your elbows. It's all over the place, and to be honest with you, I've artificially cut this. In most of the programs I've learned in, instruction starts from maneuvering from a position to the guillotine choke. So you have to move from closed guard to finding the setup to then doing the guillotine choke. So you have multiple procedures that you're trying to get people to at all times are all together in one exercise. It's no wonder people are so confused. My best stab at making this external, my coach and I were working on this, is clamp both sides of the neck tight and move his chin towards his chest. Now, if that doesn't work very well, I mean, you can reference the arm. As Ed alluded to, analogies are also useful as part of external focus. I think optimally you want to focus outside of yourself, but if you have to reference your own body, converting it into an analogy or some sort of word picture is really useful to not muddy up attentional resources. Okay, so moving on, just a quick summary of what Gabrielle Wolf, she discovered this. She worked with several researchers to expand this literature. This literature is really strong. And an interesting thing about this is that Gabrielle Wolf is IP. She's like a Schmidt schema theory type of person. She's not ecological. So I sometimes hear people push back on the external language idea. It's like, well, that's the ecological. You don't have. That's not. That's your ecological thing. And it's actually as close to bipartisan as you can get, with Gabrielle Wolf in her own writings quoting Rob Gray, because he's done some great research here in this area. I think some of it was for Nissan, for safety and stuff like that. So an internal focus of attention, according to the findings of Wolf's attentional focus literature, it frustrates motor control. So that's your ability in the moment to coordinate your movements in an effective way. So this produces an immediately inferior performance. relative to an external focus of attention. This is where you have to be really disciplined with your thinking. Most people have never used, at least not consistently, never used an external focus of attention, and they have never compared it with an internal focus of attention. Most people, I was this way too when I taught Taekwondo. I was egregiously internal, just egregiously internal. Details for days. They have never compared the two, and so people will clap back at you when you talk about an external focus of attention. Well, it works. I've always taught this way. It works really well. It works really well compared to what? What isn't? How do you compare it to something which is categorical, or you need to compare it to something which is categorically different? You're still going to find a spectrum of differences between different kinds of internal focuses of attention, but external focus of attention usually beats it out every time, according to what we've seen in the literature. So it's also generally disadvantageous for motor learning. So it doesn't just frustrate control, it frustrates acquisition and retention. So it ripples throughout the learning process. Can we take a guess, according to ecological dynamics, why that might be the case? Why would it be the case that inducing an internal focus of attention might frustrate learning?
Interacting with the environment, or interacting with your own thoughts.
Yeah. So you're not finding specifying information. You're not focused on the information you need to perceive and exploit. You're focusing on what's going on inside here. So along those lines, there's also poorer transfer from practice to practice. I think Stuart Armstrong calls it the learning performance paradox. This is another one that really trips up instructors. So, and I did this, we've all done this. I would measure the success of my instruction based on how well I saw immediate performance improvement to the person I was delivering instruction to. And most people can get a sufficient improvement in performance using even an internal focus of attention. You can get that, but it disappears. It's transient. It doesn't stick. And it certainly doesn't help you control yourself better when you find yourself dealing with that same problem again. So, yes, sir.
Does any of the frustration that arises from a more internally focused attention, is any of that related to the inaccurate stories of what we tell ourselves happened during interaction or during a specific scenario, because of how we normally view looking at what happened? For instance, if you compete, I think somebody mentioned it yesterday when we were just hanging out talking to the wall, looking at, they did it was a drop Sayanagi, and they thought it was beautiful, amazing technique, and they looked back at it, and it was horrible.
It was garbage, yeah.
Stumbled and fell. But from what they told themselves, how they did it, they thought it was just beautiful judo technique, and in reality it was a horrible movement that just happened to work.
Right.
Is any of the frustration that results in internal focus due to the fact that the information that we're trying to tell ourselves is also inaccurate just by itself?
Yeah, I think they're very related, because what you feel internally is important information, but not in a vacuum.
Yes.
And it is certainly, when you talk about judging a technique based on an aesthetic, like all the angulature and the art part of it, you can't see all that. So you're guessing based on the way you feel internally on that. And that's probably associated based on feedback you got from an instructor. If you did a technique really well in drilling, you have a sense of what that felt like internally, especially because drilling usually induces an internal focus of attention. And you got feedback, that was beautiful, that was a beautiful throw. If it feels anything like that collection of impressions while you're rolling, you might think that you had reproduced that same aesthetically pleasing sharp technique in the middle of a roll until you watch it on video and you realize it wasn't anything like it.
So you're saying a coach reinforcing, or in a positive manner, the aesthetic during, especially an unrealistic drilling scenario, whenever somebody hits the same move, even if it's entirely different, they're more likely to perceive it as aesthetically pleasant?
Yeah, because you can't see yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the feedback you're getting.
That is horrible.
That is horrible, yeah. So let's contrast with the external focus of attention. Of course, this is not a revelation. We've been talking about it the whole time. It immediately improves motor control. Immediately. When compared with an internal focus of attention. It improves future motor control. Wolf wrote in her book, with one of her studies, I think it was a golfing task. So somebody that was in the external focus group, they were given external instructions. They showed better motor control, better performance for that task. And then they returned to the same task and were not re-instructed or re-cued on external language. They were just asked to repeat the task. And the improvement in motor control persisted. It showed up again without being re-cued. So I take that as a sort of implicit support of direct perception and finding the right information for control. When you find the right information for control, you're going to self-organize towards that much, much better. And of course, it boosts motor learning, which is a relatively permanent improvement measured by transfer tests. Motor learning does not take place until you have a leap, not a leap rather, but a change in functional skilled behavior that becomes stable. If it disappears, if it's highly unstable, then learning hasn't really taken place yet. You're in the learning process. Learning is currently taking place, but learning in the relatively permanent sense is not quite taking place. Okay, so yes, sir.
So in regard to like motor learning.
Yes, sir.
Maybe my perception's wrong, but motor learning is like kind of your reaction, if kind of in an if-then sense. So motor learning doesn't really occur until you kind of have a specific then to a specific hand. So like jiu-jitsu wise, for example, if somebody, if you're in something that resembles half guard, you start reaching under their loose leg, they know that they're likely to get swept. So your reaction, you have learned that you need to get your chest down and you're probably going to get swept over the top. Would that be an example of like something that you have learned that can now go in the bank, so to speak, like reaction-wise?
Let me untangle that a little bit. Okay, so it's not a specific reaction to a specific stimulus. It is a change in function. Have you become better at solving this problem or navigating this position? And so sometimes a position is so niche that there is only one or two specific behaviors, but often it's not the case. Right? There's so many different ways to pass the guard, so many different ways to play the guard. And so it's an improvement in function in managing those problems, those specific problems, but not necessarily with specific solutions. And so there's stability there. It's also relative. So you might be rolling a lot, as a white belt, you might be rolling with a lot of white belts, and you find yourself improving relative to other white belts and maybe even some blue belts, but then you just get totally shut down by an upper belt, right? That doesn't mean that no learning has taken place. That just means that a chess player with an ELO of 800 tried to challenge, Carlsen Magnus or whoever the champion is right now. The comparison between the huge skill disparity is just it's crazy. So yeah, it's tricky to untangle, but it needs to be persistent. It's not necessarily specific, but there is a change in your ability, your functional ability to navigate and manage that problem. You might actually improve at addressing the problem and still not succeed, right? Along the same lines of going against someone who has a much greater amount of skill. You can still improve and still not succeed. So there's still learning taking place there. Any more questions? Okay. All right, 3D model of coaching. Finally, the actual thing. So the 3D model, I call it the 3D model because there are 3 phases that a coach runs through that are his key functions or her key functions as a coach. The first is to design practice. The second is to direct attention. And the third is to dissect performance. Those are the 3 Ds. Of course, it's an ecological thing, so it has to be nonlinear. So the phases, I present them in the design, direct, and dissect order. That seemed the most logical to me. But the reality is you're going through these phases in some way, shape, or form at all time scales of coaching. What I mean by that is preparing for practice, which is a before practice time scale, during practice, and like immediately after practice, right? So I have organized these not in the order of the Ds as I present them, but in fact in the order of these time scales. So we'll start with the before practice time scale. I put some, did someone raise their hand? The peripheral vision is going out of control. So an example of dissection activities that happen before practice timescale is really asking yourself the question, how have students been performing? What's going on? What's problematic? What's working? What's not? How can I support and diversify strong skills? It's basically just engaging in a process of reflection to fuel your design activities, right? And everyone is familiar with the design activities in the before practice timescale because it's what we talk about most when we talk about CLA. So what games are we going to sequence together for this session? What is the purpose of the sequence of these games and all the different games that we've collected together? And then how are we designing each individual game? What constraints are we manipulating? Those sorts of things. But what we sometimes don't think about is how we're actually engaging in directive activities and directing attention by preparing how it is we're going to deliver or present it to the students. So you should actually be thinking about how it is you're going to deliver those task instructions when you're designing the games, because where you want their attention to be focused is actually going to be, whether explicitly or implicitly, constrained or directed in a way by the constraints manipulations themselves. An example of that would be if you're engaging in a pinning situation where the pinner starts in the pin and the bottom player is simply trying to get out of the pin, there's a lot of different things that are just not available to you, right? Your attention is finely tuned either to maintaining chest to chest or to breaking chest to chest. And that is a way in which you direct attention through the constraints. Okay, so here's an exercise I want you guys to, this is on slide 17. There's a little doc here. See if I can pull it up. There we go. And I can read these as well. This is not a quiz. You're not being graded. This is simply a challenge to get you thinking in terms of translating what internal instructions tend to be a very natural inclination for instructors. Translating what you would naturally say to deliver a task instruction into external language. So the first one is the internal version of this that I want you to translate is, to prevent yourself from being caught in side control, lie on your ribs and connect your knee to your elbow.
I was letting you know, it's asking us to request access.
Really? That is crazy. I could swear. Yeah, I'll describe it. Okay, let me repeat it. Yeah, that's going to take too long to fix. To prevent yourself from being caught in side control, lie on your ribs and connect your knee to your elbow. How could we translate that more externally? By the way, there's multiple ways you could potentially do this, so it's not a big deal.
What are you trying to prevent? What did you say at the beginning?
So the task instructions, I want you to translate them into external instructions. So the internal version of this that I'd like you to translate is to prevent yourself from being caught in side control. Lie on your ribs and connect your knee to your elbow. So building that, often they'll talk about building that structure. How could we translate that into a more external instruction?
So like pinch a penny between your elbow and your knee, or give them some type of like fake object.
Yeah. It's less internal, but you're still focused on what you're doing and not how you're moving your partner. Yeah.
Be able to bear your partner's weight with your, I guess, shin is forearm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't say necessarily this, but I tell them to create obstacles between them and the other person. So in this case, if that's what you're looking for is the connection, I would say that with don't let them get between your knee and elbow. Don't let the other person get between your knee and your elbow.
Okay, cool. Don't let them get between your knee and elbow. We're still referencing the knee and the elbow, but now the other person is in play. Like, don't let them do this. So there is room there now for self-organization. I think we can get more external. Yes, ma'am.
Have the hips pointing the same way?
Well, so your own hips relative to your partner?
Partner hips.
Partner's hips. So you're talking about manipulating your partner's hips.
To get them on their side, you can say, point your butt at the wall behind you or something like that.
Yeah,
Like,
right. We're still internal at that point, yeah.
Block the person.
Yeah, you could. You could.
Block them,
See what happens.
block them from getting chest to chest. Or
Yeah. See what happens. Yeah. You could add a model to it, like you actually show yourself doing this, but the actual instruction is keep them away. So you provide an example of you using both parts of the frame, your leg and your forearm. Yes, sir.
So that we're still doing chest to chest, and we don't go to the back, because if you just say don't let them get chest to chest, you could turtle or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would constrain the game to your chest must be, at least facing up or some sort of direction, and do not let them come. And sometimes it'll be this, sometimes
Yeah.
it'll be the leg, sometimes it'll be this and that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you could even say you must use both limbs to block them from coming in.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
Or just one limb or two limbs. There's a little bit of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's okay to sometimes reference the limb if you have to, as long as the main thrust of the instruction is actually how it is that you are moving or manipulating your partner. Did I see a hand?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I guess with the way that the question is framed, you're specifying the kind of body movement that you want for them, as opposed to the goal of like preventing passing or getting into the inside space. So like if what you want is for them to get on their side and create this specific kind of frame, I guess, is that a counter to trying to get them to achieve a specific goal in terms of their relative body positions? Does that make sense? Or?
I think so. Are you worried that other ways of, like, for example, finding a way to frame the person and stand up, are you worried that's not going to happen, or are you worried that a specific thing's not going to emerge?
Just in the framing of this specific exercise and finding a way to translate this from.
Oh yeah, yeah. So basically, you're just trying to stop someone from pinning you. That's what I'm getting at. So how would you instruct somebody to stop that from happening? They haven't made a strong connection yet in this case. I probably should have clarified that, but obviously the knee to elbow connection is one that everybody talks about. Like, everybody talks about knee to elbow connection, and it's useful in a lot of different.
Can you get it to emerge without saying knee to elbow?
Oh, yeah, easy, yeah.
Block maybe a specific area on that person's body. Block the leading edge of the person coming at you.
Yeah.
Maybe it emerges.
Yeah, I think so. And you might have things that are better. Like, if you can actually, you're probably stronger in this position than you are in this position. So if you can catch something even earlier and create more space between you and your partner, first of all, you're more likely to slide your knee in to keep that distance away. So that affordance is more inviting potentially, especially if you don't have very flexible hips. And you might have other things that emerge, like just weird stuff like just standing up. Like just not even trying to play the game of keeping away and shrimping. Yes, sir?
I'm just like thinking about, because like the more I tried, the longer my cues were, the more internal they started to get. Every
Yeah.
next sentence, I'd be like, okay, how do I, here's 6 or 7 words. The more words, the more internal it gets. So I was just thinking like structure or like distance.
Right.
So like the only cues I could come up with were just these like one word intentions rather than, because anytime I tried to explain to it, it was always like, okay, now I'm very quickly getting into like talking about the spectrum of internal. It just keeps getting more and more internal.
Yeah. The more details you feel you have to add, the more impossible it is not to get into internal language. Yes, sir?
Maybe we get it to emerge by looking at the end of the task, right? So if the end of the task is to completely get back to open guard, then we put our hands and our feet in front of us, basically keep them pointed at their hips. So basically keep your hands and feet pointed at their hips.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, sir?
I'm realizing from this discussion, first of all, how often I still use internal focus. And second of all, even when I use external focus and control, it's a lot of don't let them do this to you, as opposed to do something. Right?
Yes. That is an excellent insight.
How to get someone to stand up without telling them to stand up?
Right. Give them the option first, yeah. Or you can say just don't let yourself be pinned. Like don't be pinned. Eventually you're gonna be like, you know what, it's a little bit easier not to be pinned if I just stay off the floor. Shoulders and hips, it becomes harder. So you get kind of a natural funnel there. Probably a little bit dependent on conditioning because it is hard to stand up, keep somebody off you. Did I see a hand over here?
I was just going to say that I've seen this a lot with my kids, where the ones that seem to speed through things so well they're not focused on what I'm telling them at all, except for what the goal is. And so they just totally ignored all of the instructions. This is my actual children. They've just ignored all the instructions and just want to get to the goal. And then all of a sudden, they're doing things that I wouldn't have been
Right.
on anyway. And it's like,
Yeah.
golf or whatever.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how even just setting their intention, there's already an intentional effect that you don't even have to introduce. One of the reasons why it's important to know how to guide attention is because not everyone's going to be that quite as good as automatically locking on the information. But there's already a constraint happening here. When you give them the intention or you give them the task goal, the region of exploration is occluded. It's made smaller. So if I tell you, I'm going to punch you in the face, I'm not telling you if it's a straight or a round or whatever. It doesn't matter. Where are you going to look first? Arms or shoulder, right? If you're trained, you might look more at the shoulders. If you're untrained, you're going to look at my arms, right? You already know where to look when I told you what the tactic I'm going to use. And it doesn't matter the side. You can look, you don't even have to look at both necessarily directly because you can see both shoulders usually, but you already know, you're already constrained there in a way. So when we come along and guide, we're helping them almost solve a problem. So when Greg talks about addressing the most pressing concerns, like, okay, I'm trying to pass this guard, I'm framed, my legs are here. You have to address like the arms or the leg first, depending on what's going on. Like there's already like a temporal or a physical hierarchy of the problems. It doesn't matter all this stuff afterwards unless you deal with the arm first, because you can't get to where you want to get to unless you deal with the most pressing problem. When we're trying to solve a problem, we often get lost in the mud. We get lost in all the noise and the signal because there's so many perturbations happening to the system. And so as a coach, you come along and recenter the focus where the focus needs to be on the most pressing problem. Eventually, you're going to help calibrate their attention to implicitly and automatically, I don't have a better word, but self-organize in a self-organized way to detect and begin to solve those problems on their own.
Josh,
Yes, sir.
I think this is where like metaphors and that can come in really handy. Like to your example, I would maybe say something like, give them an example that you're creating some kind of, there's a gate that they're trying to go through, keep that gate closed.
Yeah, analogy, keep the gate closed, yeah.
These are stories that people can kind of internalize over time.
Yeah, word picture. Yeah. So if you were doing and there might be a great reason to do something where you're specifically dealing with staying on the ground and not getting up, and you want to create that structure. There's definitely specific cases for that in which keep the gate closed, right? Guys, this is a gate. Keep the gate closed. It's an excellent way to do it without being too internal, because then you're going to be fussing over, is the angle right? It's falling apart? Like, what's going on? Yes, sir.
Research has said that the external focus produces better outcomes. It seems like analogies are somewhere in the middle between internal focus and external. So, like using the gate being closed, it's probably not as great. If you can find the external focus, go to the external focus. If you can't, then probably go somewhere in between, and you'll get.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
It's like 70%. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because modeling is really useful, but the thing about modeling, like giving an example, a demonstration, kids are really great about this too. Adults are more trained to like, okay, what's going on with the exact angle of the arm? So they're trying to be intentionally more analytical about it. Kids are really good at copying, and so they see something from a model, they just try and do it. And then you stick them in a situation and they try to make it work given the constraints. There might be something similar going on there with a word picture and analogy and what happens when you watch somebody do something. Because that can be really helpful to see an example of it. It can be really, really helpful.
Would that fall under a holistic focus? Some of the literature I've read said something about a holistic focus, and it seemed to blend more into like analogy-based.
Yeah.
It said that, at least what I read, I can't remember where I saw it, but it said that it leaned much closer in success rate to external focus as obviously than internal. So we've kind of been pushing some of our, for example, I have a kids, actually, again, with kids. I had a kids coach who was teaching some open guard passing, and he was using, when you feel like you're becoming destabilized, pretend like you're surfing on a wave. And all of a sudden, everybody adjusted their body and their center of gravity changed. And although it may not have been a perfect movement solution for passing the guard,
right,
or at least catching the balance.
Yes.
So I don't know whether, I'm asking you whether or not there's any validations, that is kind of a correct process that we could look to. If external is really difficult and an analogy makes sense.
Yeah, so this is not an exact science. Nick Winkelman wrote a whole book on it. He's a little bit more anecdata than like everything is in an actual paper. But I think he was an understudy of Wolf, if I'm not mistaken. I don't quite remember. In his experience, because it's very difficult to test these sort of things. In his experience as a coach, has coached lots of elite players. People often respond differently to different cues, and sometimes cues wear out, and you have to find another way to explain it to get that performance back. I would err on the side of external because it's so strong. But Greg actually alluded to this. He passed over it pretty quickly, but he said there are sometimes good reasons, even if there is a performance decrement, to focus on an internally. A good example of this outside of jiu-jitsu would be bodybuilding. And with the mind-body connection, or the mind-muscle connection, the neurological connection is so important that the way you do some lifts, you really have to focus on how the muscle feels as your only way to know if that exercise is accomplishing its task. And so if you do it explosively, if you do that same movement explosively, it might not stimulate the muscle for the growth you want. It might be more for training your neurological system to be, plyometric or explosive, rather than to elicit hypertrophy. It's different. Your muscles, they're highly adaptable, and so they adapt to the demands you put on them. And so plyometrics is not the same as building muscle, right? Those are same lifts sometimes, but different stimuluses. On muscles, yeah, definitely. I would be as balanced as you can be. Err on the side of external. If external's not working, just work your way down. Analogy, wow, okay, well maybe I do need to reference this body part because it's just the analogy's not working, the external focus is not working very well. But for the most part, if you just trust in self-organization, it works most of the time. It works most of the time, yeah. Yes, sir.
So this is specific to your scenario, but you're talking about getting them to make that connection for the outcome of escaping side control, right?
Preventing, rather, yeah.
Preventing.
But it sets you up for escape,
So,
yeah.
What do you think about using like an errorless learning approach where you say, all right, stay here, person on top is going to try and break through that, and keep that as long as you can.
Yeah.
Once they feel how effective that is, then you kind of go back in, all right, now start from here and work your way back out.
Yeah. I think that's consistent, but you're eating into class time. And you're also, and if you have new players, you're also eating into like conditioning and.
I wouldn't do it for everything.
Yeah.
Something specific.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Using that kind of frame.
Yeah. So they feel the power for sure, yeah. So they kind of feel, oh, this is actually that affordance now is more inviting to them because they're, oh, okay, I can manage a lot of weight.
You can go from there
Yeah.
to back on your back. Like,
Yeah.
Now I just need to suck myself into that.
Yeah.
Possibly they're needing that structure more than a structure that might be more effective, longer.
They might, yeah. If you allow enough interaction between the players, yeah.
Then they're attracted to that, and maybe not something more effective where you just then find a way to keep them off.
Yeah.
Off them.
Yeah. It might look a little different, but yeah.
This is the starting alignment for your game.
Yeah, that's what I think that's what he was talking about. Yeah.
You're saying,
Bouncing
It's
off
like
that,
an errorless approach.
to try and reinforce that idea and make sure they understand how strong and robust that position is. I've worked a few games where I made them start there and told them, like you're saying, just maintain that position as long as you can.
Yeah.
Players are trying to split and either fill the gap with chest or knee, just do a slide and split.
Fill the gap. I like that.
Yeah, just
Fill the gap. Yeah.
And then I would switch it and go. And the next round would be, okay, you can do anything besides connect the knee and elbow. And then, but you're still starting perpendicular and they're still trying to connect either chest or slide the knee in between. And then after that, once we get towards the end of the session, obviously open it up to where it's more of a representative game in terms of passing, and almost every single person immediately goes to knee to elbow, keep that frame strong. Just because they understand that once you have that, it's easy to keep them off, especially if they're heavier.
Yeah.
Hold them at bay.
Yeah.
You can't. It's horrible.
Right. Yeah. For sure. The only warning I have there is with is that you can reintroduce the prescriptiveness.
Yes.
And so you have so many problems that come out of that now. Now you have to try and hit every single, what you as a coach personally believe are all the most important techniques that you have to know. We're gonna get all these progressions, and how do you put it all together? There's not enough interaction, there's not enough creativity and exploration.
The only time I try to do that to make sure I don't do that, because I originally ran into that issue, was particularly with frames for bottom.
Okay.
Just maintaining or creating distance with frames, using a specific frame, but then taking it away. That way, learn how to use the frame and learn what happens when they don't have the frame, and then slowly build up to a representative game.
Yeah.
Anything else in terms of specific movements or positions, I figured out it turns very prescriptive very quickly.
Right. Very quickly. And it's easy to think you're doing the constraints-led approach when in fact you're actually just sneaking in prescription through the back door again. Great, excellent discussion. So I asked all that first because I actually wanted I wanted you guys to work through it before I offered some principles. So there was already a working basis that you work through. So for helping you put together really good external task constructions, I would identify the effect. What is the end state of the task goal? That was mentioned before already. I would try to, if you can, analogies are fine, but describe mechanically and externally what it is you want the player to do. Focus on what players must do with or to their opponents to achieve a success condition rather than what players must do with their own bodies, right? Greg is probably the best I've ever seen at this. Everything he describes, sometimes you have to play back what he said and listen to it again because it's so precise, but it's also so foreign to how we speak as martial artists that the way he constructs it is you have to pay attention. I would, if possible, this is not for everything, zero in on the most important body part being manipulated to achieve that effect. So if the game is scaled up, there's a lot of variability. You can't really do this because you're managing a lot of problems at the same time. But if you're scaling a game down, especially for beginners, I had this discussion with my coach because he wanted to the effect of the instructions getting internal and just growing and growing and growing because you're trying to front load all this information. He was trying to help us with single leg takedowns, and the game was already starting with us with one of the control positions leading to a single leg takedown. And I was trying to explain how he could make that external. So what I came up with is, since you already have the lever that manipulates the center of gravity at your hips, put the hips on the ground. Put the hips on the ground. You already have the control. Put the hips on the ground. I think the self-organization around that would be excellent. It would also help get away from some of these things, like where you see when you scale a game down, you'll see behaviors that are not well adapted to an actual match, where they'll just dump a person and not follow them, or they'll not mind where they land up, so they could be caught in a triangle or something. If you actually have to put the hips on the ground, you have to be disciplined about the force, and you might have to follow them down. It also leaves options for just really funky defenses like the Ruotolo brothers have, where you actually post. It's not simply putting your hand down and you lose the game, but there's all kinds of things you can do to keep your hips off the ground and find unique ways to escape. So if possible, I would zero in on the most important body part being manipulated, but that's really just for scaled down games. And then it kind of as an ancillary point, establish clear success conditions for both players for sufficiently scaled down. So examples of bad task construction for like soccer, a bad like a field kick, bad instruction would be like, when you kick the ball, make sure the foot is fixated in a hyperextended position. Now I'm totally concerned with what I'm doing with my leg. I'm not looking at the target. I'm not concerned with where I'm hitting the ball. I'm concerned with how I move my leg specifically. A good version of that would be kick the foot way out like a ballerina. See how the analogy kind of works in there? That's a really useful tool. So with lying on your ribs and connecting your knee to your elbow, I would say use your arms and legs to stay in front of your opponent's hips and shoulders and push him away. And you might even be able to have a clever way to even remove referencing the arms and the legs. But the main thing of that is keep the operant part of that is keep the opponent's hips and shoulders away. Push them away. That's if you're trying to gauge in the moment how effective the tactic is, the movement of the hips and the shoulders away from you, that's like specifying information for whether or not you are successfully defending yourself in that moment. So those are the key, when you're defending, those are the key pieces of information to focus on, is keeping the shoulders and the hips away. Okay, so I wanted to come back around to, let's try this one more time with a different example. I have more examples on here, but I don't think we have time to get to them all. So, okay, so from guard, or from half guard rather, the task construction is to stay on your side, place your bottom hand on your partner's bicep, and your top arm across the shoulder, framing your forearm across the upper chest to keep him from flattening you out. There's a lot going on there. So place your bottom hand on your partner's bicep, top forearm across the shoulder, keep him from flattening. How can we make this more external? Yes, sir.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just trying to visualize.
Oh, I thought you were like you're like angling to go up there. Do I need to read that again, or are we thinking? Okay. Okay, so from half guard, stay on your side. Place your bottom hand on your partner's bicep, your top arm across the shoulder, the shoulder and the upper chest, and keep him from flattening you out. So I am referencing the partner here, so it's not entirely internal. But there's a lot going on. Yes, sir.
So I guess I'm kind of stuck on this. So with both this and the last example, am I correct in understanding that you're trying to get the student to have to use a specific solution, like in terms of like keeping the distance? Like you're like with the one with keeping the elbow to the knee. If I understand correctly, you're not just trying to get them to have some way of maintaining the distance and keeping, like protecting the space, but you want them to specifically use this solution. Is that correct?
In this specific example, yes, I'm prescribing a frame, one that I've been taught many times, bicep, shoulders, that helps prevent you from being flattened by creating that barrier.
Inherently prescriptive if you have a specific behavior that you're trying to get them to do as opposed to solving the situation. I guess that's the
Yeah, that's the purpose of this. I want you to translate it into something external, where it's not quite as opinionated about how you do it. Yes, ma'am.
So I think what he's asking is because you want the specific of using your forearm, your wrist, your hand on the bicep, whereas if they just use maybe two hands on both shoulders, what's the difference?
Or I guess if you have this sort of specific end goal in terms of their behavior that you want, I guess I sort of like, why not start with this internal reference and then just work from there? And sometimes it feels like you're trying to create a bunch of, I mean, not just specifically for people, you're trying that there's an attempt to create a whole bunch of constraints in order to, I don't know, using constraints or external cues to fill up all the negative space around which would just be an internal instruction, and then to sort of let them work organically from there.
Well, so the literature is pretty clear that it usually frustrates the actual acquisition process, and it frustrates performance, and it frustrates control. Doesn't mean you'll never be successful with it, but compared to external instructions, yes. I don't want to give away, because the actual external, I mean, there's several ways to do it externally, but it's actually much simpler. You don't even have to explain it. Yes, sir.
I mean, I do think that describing the setup is inherently somewhat internal, somewhat external.
Often, yeah.
So you describe the setup, how you're supposed to be, how your opponent's supposed to be, and then the external thing, don't let him push you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
and that would be the whole.
The actual task is the most important part to be external about. The other stuff, it's usually okay, I think, to reference it. Sometimes you can't not reference the. Yes, sir.
There's something like the floor is lava.
The floor is lava.
Because not,
Yeah.
again, I'm thinking like we don't want, like if we're starting in the alignment, we're starting them on the side. We don't want, shoulders pinned, touch chest.
Yeah.
Like we want I was trying to think about, we want as little contact with the floor at this point as possible. Like once you start in that alignment, like there's no way, we don't want to go backwards, right?
Yeah.
So then I was thinking like, well, what if it was some scenario where we're wearing like a white suit and like there's like the more paint we get on our suit, the worse that is.
Right.
And then I kind of like went again like a step more basic of like, okay, the floor is lava, but like you don't want your entire back to be the less of you that's in contact with that, the better.
Yeah. I like that. I think I would default to clear task instructions about what it is you're doing with the opponent's body. But if they're starting to create frames, but they're having trouble letting themselves be flattened, the floor is lava could be a really great cue to add on that. But I would experiment starting with that. As long as they understand what a winning condition is, I would experiment. Like start with that first and see if it works as good or better than giving more clear instruction about pushing the shoulder away, right? Pushing the shoulder and the hips away. I see a hand. Yes, sir.
It seems like the thing you're asking us to get our students to do is very prescriptive in the first place. So you're you're prescribing exactly what you want them to do, and then you say, but I thought the whole idea was not to prescribe and give them the space to learn, and more say just standards, keep them away from you, on the side or something. and that would get you there.
Yeah.
But you're giving so many details that you're prescribing the exact way of doing something, which seems counterproductive.
Yeah, with the one that I've just presented you, yes, there's lots going on. So I would like you to translate it to something that's simpler and external, which you just said, like keep them away from you, which is great. Keep them away from you. If you want to help guide attention, the shoulders and the hips are the key area there. So you want to keep the shoulders away. You want to keep the hips away, right? Yes, ma'am.
This is all my question the whole time. Is that it seems like a really stupid question, but I thought in our first example, why are we talking about the arms? Why wouldn't you tell the student? And this is a genuine question. Like, is the point of the exercise? How do you talk about creating a specific frame? Because my thought would be, tell them to keep their hips and shoulders on. Like that's all you need to tell them. Or is this like a specific scenario where somebody's not having success, or they haven't figured out they know that that's the goal, but they're not doing it, and then you feel the need to bring it in? I guess why wouldn't you just say, keep their hips and shoulders moving?
Right, that's great. So I don't know what everyone's level of exposure to the ecological dynamics is, and I certainly don't know what everyone's competence is with external focus of attention. So you're automatically, that's great, you're automatically looking at something like, this is terrible. These are actual instructions I've gotten before. Like, this is how, so the how to do the action is usually wrapped up, just the exact, almost without reference to your partner sometimes. So for anyone who's not used to thinking in this way, these are meant to challenge you to actually translate that into external focus attention. Now, if you automatically, you look at this like, that's terrible, and you can you can just tell them to keep, that's great, that's excellent. Like you're grown beyond this challenge. Yes, sir.
But by, I don't know what I think, but by giving us these things, you're already setting us up with a bad place to start.
Well, I'm asking you to translate it.
Well, yeah, but the translating action isn't the idea in the first place. So what I was thinking is, if you had a mental model,
is that the invariance that we want to get? There's nothing about that particular position that is leading to some sort of, we're not constraining it to some sort of invariant. Any of the invariants.
I feel like I'm going to define it better.
That isn't the solution either, right? Yeah. You just want the insight of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think so. Is this a discussion about how I'm trying to teach you?
Just how we're doing this. I would think that the best way to do it would be give a mental model. Give what does he call it? Invariant. Give an invariant and say, how can you get them to practice this, deal with this invariant?
Or present the problem and then have someone would cue them internally, which would be someone internally. The problem is managing distance from half guard. An internal cue would be or a very specific internal cue, put your arm over this in front of them. An external cue would be use your hand and feet to get between you and your partner, stand up and reverse or knock them over. So you're not looking for a direct translation of an external cue for how to get your arm in this position. You're looking for an external cue.
Keep the shoulders and hips away. Keep the shoulders and hips away. Yeah, I'm not looking, so I'm giving you, So there's a little bit more going on than just.
Hands and feet to push your opponent,
right.
knock them over, or use your hands and feet to get between the two of you. Use connect your body using your feet or your hands.
Yes, you can go full self-organization and just say, keep the shoulders and hips away and see what happens. And if it doesn't work very well, then you can reference the legs and the arms and the legs and see what happens, right? It's a process of finding, searching, and exploring. So these are intentionally bad because I want you to think about how to make them better. But I guess there is missing context in the sense that I'm assuming that coming from an ecological dynamics perspective, that when you fix the cue, you're also thinking in terms of allowing more self-organization. So you're right. Like I kind of, it's creating a little bit of a bottleneck there, where am I trying to recreate the exact solution as specified here, or am I trying to do something like it? I want you to do something like it. Think in terms of more self-organization and not in terms of being as maximally prescriptive as possible.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a very large difference between prescribing alignment in the starting position and prescribing a movement solution. Now, Now, obviously, the alignment that we begin in, however we decide to set that up, is going to lead our students into a given area of movement solutions. Meaning, if we start with that cross-shoulder pose and bicep pose and tell them to knock it flat down, there's only so many things they can do if they have to maintain that cross-shoulder pose and that bicep. But by starting them with a specific alignment, you are not prescribing the solution itself. You're just narrowing down the focus so that they can use a specific area. Obviously, the ideal, like you're saying, it's a bad way to frame the beginning right there. You start with this position, but I think a lot of people are confusing. You're prescribing a specific solution rather than just prescribing an alignment to begin in. Because we can start any type of alignment, use any language we want to begin with. But however we start, the alignment is going to direct the students into which direction they're going to go.
Right. So I'm expecting, so when I present the bad task instructions, I'm expecting you to translate it into the function and then to give something that's more open-ended or more